Hello, everyone. So, as you heard, my name is Petri Alanko, and I'm here to talk something we all have had once back in the day, or will have one day. Who knows? I'm talking about the moment when you realize your creative juice is gone, throttled, or just dried out. I'm a composer, sound designer, and a producer. With all those titles, I'm wearing several roles through a production. Mostly the creative and the analytic, and the roles they take turns one after another until the project is done and delivered. And for some reason, my artistic side is sometimes at war with my analytic side. And of course, that could cause trouble unless I prepare the battlefield beforehand and I use possible blocks for cover or even turn them into weapons or building blocks. Anyway, I think I have some experience on this, especially regarding the fact that I've been doing creative stuff, music and sounds, for my living since 1990. So that's a long time, almost Jurassic age when I was born. For some reason, I haven't had actual blocks since 2008 or so, and I think I need to explain that a little. But please note that we are all different. So the stuff I'm sharing with you here will most likely need some adjusting from your side if you're trying to apply those things into your way of working. So a few words for those who have no idea whatsoever this guy here is doing. In the past, I've had my fair share of daily pop writing. I've done lyrics, productions, arrangements, got some little under 400 credits in the local copyright office. I've done remixes and things like that, lots of joint productions. I participated in creative advertisement campaigns, being an IT concept designer, about neck deep in audio branding. But what you might actually know me best is my past and my present and possibly my future too. Gaming world. It all began with Alan Wake, then Alan Wake's American Nightmare and all the DLC packages for that. I got a little stuck with Trials series by Red Lynx/Ubisoft, namely Trials Evolution and Trials Fusion. Then I continued over to Remedy Entertainment's Quantum Break, and probably the last one I can freely speak about is a project we did, Remedy Entertainment did for Smilegate, the Korean company, called Crossfire 2. Remedy was responsible for the first player mode, single player mode, sorry. And well, that's going to come out someday next year, I guess. They don't really talk about the release dates, those people. And audio branding wise, my past clients include quite a few companies such as, have you heard of Slush, the technology/IT/startup festival back in Finland? You haven't, you should actually, it's amazing, really amazing thing. And then some Nokia, have you heard of that? Microsoft, yeah, I know. Finnish National Ballet and cruise companies, hotels, things like that. Anybody who is in need of audio branding or wants to decorate with sound, they usually call either me or several of my colleagues in Finland. I've also written somewhere between 55 to 60 audio Bibles for startup companies in Finland. And audio Bible means it's a, how would I say, it's a series of good points that you should follow when it comes to your company's brand. How do you relate to licensed music? How do you relate to user interface sounds? How do you relate to B2C or B2B material? All kinds of different things. And none of those are actually copy-pasted. It's always written from scratch because each company is different. No matter how identical they may look like when they are being born, there's always a lot of differences between those companies, not just because of the titles they are trying to produce or or the products they are going to release, it's all about their DNA, so to speak. So I take a little part of their DNA and I try to imagine what is going to happen in, let's say, 5 or 10 or so years. And in addition to all those things, I happen to be the audio director of Finnish broadcasting company, or head of audio, depending on in which country you are translating this. Yle, which means FBC, is a company of little over 3,000 people, and they have a massive amount of different products. So they need guidance, and each of those products need to be put into the same event horizon in order to, be acquaintancing of each other, instead of one being in this galaxy and another one being in somewhere else. It's a little bit similar to those in a gaming company, except there is just a huge number of different programs and items going on at once. But I haven't given up the pop world either, so sorry, I had to do this. Yeah, my album came out on 16th of September, but my case here concerning this is the foghorn thing. It was there to cement the whole message into your brain, or at least it should be. When your brain receives a surprise stimulus that doesn't really fit in with the rest of the information or overall situation, you'll be at your sharpest for about 5 seconds or so. And this is a basic trick from advertisements. Some radio stations have regulated their ad structure so that the tempo or the voice of the advertisement must change 3 times in a minute or twice in 30 seconds, just to keep us alert, just to sell us more things, just to, feed us information. It's brain trickery at its best, and I'm talking a little about brain trickery. Tackling a deadline, you see, it isn't simple at all. It's incredibly hard if you boot up your computer, load your composing template, and just start doing what you do best or are most comfortable with. And I sometimes create a sound library or an instrument library before anything else, before I even compose a note. In some cases, the method helps a great deal to dive deep into the worlds of the game you're composing to, and the results of the instrument design outcome, they, in my opinion, pay greatly back in the end. But it also can be the greatest distraction there is if you're not careful enough. I also, when I'm doing that after the initial phase, I like to create a few, up to a dozen or so, really rough and quick demos when I first enter the world of the game. And sometimes some of those manage to reach the essence of the project in a new, rawest possible way, making them actually quite good material for further use, or just putting you back into the right mindset if you feel misguided later on. You really need to remind yourself every now and then about the so-called age of innocence of the project, because that's the span of time you actually realize something essential of the project. So you need to be really careful with that mindset. You have to be able to get it back when you feel stuck. I've got quite a few good examples from Quantum Break and Crossfire 2 era, with which I spent 4 years. So I faced quite a few interesting situations throughout the development cycle. A lot of things happened, and sometimes the plot was changed or rewritten, characters were changed or rewritten again. Sometimes the actor of a character was changed. So there comes the problem. The new guy usually, he or she behaved in a different way. He walked differently, talked differently, even stood differently. So there was a problem with some themes that you had composed already to the old character or the old actor. So serious rearrangement or rewriting had to be done. I've sometimes used a good example. If you think of, let's say, Beyoncé dancing and moving to one of her tracks, and then you imagine Donald Trump doing the same, it could be that raw a difference, really. So things, they don't really mix, so you have to rewrite. And sometimes the changes have to be done quicker than you actually had time. Sometimes the changes agreed on in the morning were supposed to be inside the next build during the afternoon. There was no time for freezing. So under pressure, your brain starts to adapt. You slice the information into smaller pieces subconsciously, and you learn to grab the right one, either problematic or successful after some time. And this is where most of the freezes happen, and it might need some adjusting or practicing. To help the adapting, you should be ready to adjust your role from a composer to a producer or whatnot, whatever is the other role. And this should happen through some kind of a transformation ride. And in the beginning, it's always long, and when you get used to your brain and the stuff you do, it almost happens instantaneously. But my advice for an anti-freeze is analyze your characters, the situation, the environment, and try to treat both the environment and the people as like real people. I mean, the surroundings of some events in the game, they actually are another character in the game, and they should treat it accordingly. Some characters are very self-conscious, some are independent, some are shy, quiet, whatnot. But luckily, it doesn't have to be revealed by the animation. You have to be able to talk to people who write the game and are responsible for the plot. I used to have a short personal analysis book for each situation and character of the game, and I relied heavily on the background stories of each. And the more you know about the thing you're composing to, the better, because it greases your imagination. And if not anything else, at least it will have you in the right neighborhood right away. The good side of the thorough analyzing is that you're starting to learn really fast, and at some point you'll notice you're imagining and imaging the situation and the events on screen or in the manuscript between the switches. We all require our own switch anchors or methods, and to me a switch requires a virtual preview during which I remove myself from the station I've been working on and do something else. Whatever brings you the distance to the track. It might be just, staring out the window maybe. It's important, really important, and in the end it's a matter of turning yourself into so-called Pavlov's dog. After a while you just need to lean back and you take a different role. That needs to be, reachable. Your brain is actually a strange thing. There's been a story circulating in the wide open interwebs about a surgeon. This is actually told by, can't remember the name, Malcolm Gladwell actually, who had developed a capability to separate heart patients from so-called regular patients by just asking them a few questions and staring at their data for a short while. And his success rate was stellar. He was able to save more people than most of his colleagues in that hospital. So that's what your brain is doing when you're dealing with emotions and you're dealing with your characters, music and creative arts, whatnot. Slicing becomes even easier as you can dive into the tracks by just listening to them, as long as you can reach the distance first. You need to sort of separate yourself from the situation. Sometimes when your brain, when you get badly stuck, your brain goes into a halt mode, full stop mode, in other words, in which you'll be stuck until you fix something keeping you from actually solving a dilemma. Vicious circle, you're stuck because you're stuck. So in that case, I usually, this is again me, I try, for instance, cleaning up the studio. Or it sounds stupid, but it needs to be something that produces a visible end result. It has to be something that makes you feel, I nailed that really good. It has to be giving you that false sense of completion. And actually, a friend of mine, whenever he's stuck with a song, he always tries to write as bad a song as he can. And I've been laughing my ass off for about a dozen times during the past half a year or so because of this habit of his. And the bad songs, they are turning into really marvelous ones. And he's now planning to release a YouTube series of those songs. I can hardly wait. Or actually, I'm a little afraid to wait. It might be a huge hit. I don't know. He calls those mental clearance pieces. Everybody should have those, whatever they are. Actually, a female colleague of mine, she bakes cakes whenever she's stuck. No, that works. Artistic constipation is actually a good word when it comes to that. You need to release the bad shit. Sorry, I shouldn't be using that word. You need to let out the bad blood, so to speak, in order to let the good blood circulate freely. Sorry, I know F-bombs are really bad. So the key to control your creative freezing is to write the character open based on the background, the childhood, the past, the fathers and the mothers, the early school years, the first boyfriends or girlfriends, losses and the conquers, and the motives as well. These are the mental tools the character would use, so those could be the tools that you use for composing. And if you already sunk in the black depths of everything, you should analyze why you sank there in the first place. Was the character empty? Was the action seemingly meaningless? Was the queue empty and the game didn't actually need it, but they required it anyway? You didn't find anything to write onto? So imagine a situation where the queue that is needed is actually really needed and working properly. Imagine the reasons. Nothing changes on screen, but you can fool your brains into do shit if needed. For instance, in Quantum Break, a female protagonist had seen a prophecy of sorts in her childhood, and just thinking how her life changed afterward, if that happened really, how her life changed afterwards, aiming towards the completion of this so-called prophecy or revelation. Can you imagine how that would affect you if you were 12 and your older self appears from the future and tells you, by the way, this and this is going to happen? Her childhood and school years, her waiting for the first signs of, okay, now it's going to happen, it would change everything. How it affected her studying, how it affected her hobbies, her daily chores, her relationship with possible partners. And that's an A-list of writing ground, really. It's a really interesting character, and in my opinion, she might need a game of her own, but that's not in my powers. So thus, know the history or create one. Telling stories has always been a way to release humans from their daily burden, which is why we like to stare at the fire and talk stories. We've been doing that for centuries, so maybe millennia. I don't know. So just, thinking about the protagonist, Beth, kissing her first boyfriend, for instance, and thinking, okay, this cannot mean much to me because the world is going to turn into a shit pile in a nanosecond or so, or at least before my 32nd birthday. And how that would affect the guy she had been kissing. Oh, awful. The same applied to Jack, the male protagonist in that game, as he felt he was an outsider and has been out of touch of his previous best friends and schoolmates, university pals, acquaintances, professors, whatnot. I could only imagine the reasons because in that case he needed as a theme something restless and mellow and moving and ticking, an ostinato, which is a short repeating melodic theme that appeared here and there to remark his presence in a certain scene or cinematic. And his feeling a little outsider had to be there as well. He was, after all, an involuntary hero eventually. And that's an awesome writing ground as well, because the character is so flawed that you can basically just, look at him on screen and listen him speak, and you can hear stuff in your head. But however, somehow I got stuck there right from the start. It couldn't be the theme of Jack, it couldn't be a straightforward hero theme, because he wasn't a straightforward hero, he was a complicated guy. The theme should be introvert, somewhat cloudy, restrained, not major, not minor, an outsider, that way too. And then Jack was an observer in the beginning, much like we are when we are looking, watch a movie, for instance, or TV. But Jack turned into a spectator, he turned into action after the first shocking events. And there's a strong contradiction in him, yet he was incredibly well blending as a character. And here's a case study of the theme, actually, of the problem. I was recording a sound library, because that's what I do when I got a little stuck. I try to find new sounds. And I was in my neighborhood and trying to find good places to record stuff, and I found an old iron gate, some two-part iron gate. And I put my contact mics on it and started flinging it back and forth and making it squeak and rattle. And suddenly, when I had just hit record on my field recorder, wind came and it sort of blew the parts of the gate, the doors of the gate, a little open with a different rhythm, so that the harmonic series of each rusty part, they sort of started interact with each other. And I immediately hit marker button in my field recorder, because sometimes your brain works like that. You know that there is something in that sound, but you just need to either stretch it or find that something with plugins. Your brain starts working like that. It's a little bit like seeing an old synthesizer, I mean Roland SH-101, and you see the sliders and you hear that sound in your head. That happens with plugins if you know your tools really well. Anyway, later on when I stretched that thing out, I found a series of perfect sounding notes, and it was funny that I had that feeling right away. It was exactly what I needed, the notes of those two parts of the gate. When you slowed them down, it sounded actually what is Jack's ostinato nowadays. So, but the sound was wrong. I needed to replace that, and so I tried doing a version of that by just playing a piano with its una corda pedal down, so it used only one string per key. And it got stuck there, really. It remained there until the very end, and each time Jack is somehow present with a scene in the game, that same melody or same ostinato appears in some form. It became Jack's leitmotif, so to speak. So always record something odd, because you're going to benefit from that recording session. I seriously mean you should record all the time, everything odd, be that just, snapping fingers in a loo or whatnot. I mentioned Beth earlier, the female protagonist. I got the idea for her theme from her appearance and her childhood. I mean, the fulfillment of the prophecy she'd gotten. She's humble and she's self-conscious, very capable, and there's a fine load of drama and action and love that form her timeline, entwining her path into what appears to be appears and reaches its peak in the final events of Quantum Break. So her integrity and intelligence both dictate a lot of her actions. So if I had composed her theme based on C major, A minor, F major, G major, that would have been a major understatement, really. She deserved much more complicated thing. So I'm actually going to play something next, and in which the howling feedback isn't the guitar. It's actually the same gate that produced Jack's notes. And as a concept, in that sense, Jack and Beth are together deep down there. already in sounds, not just in game, but also in sounds. So here's something that combines both Jack and Beth, partially composed by a rusty gate. Those notes are the Jack's notes that were born by the, gate opening. Yeah, there. I know the tricks of my own brain, thanks. And I've gotten to know how to trick it back, so it's a little bit like tennis, really, and I think both me and my inner layers both know that, and the game itself. Another good case study, actually, about blocks and things, with a twist, actually. Back in the day, I had broken my pinky knuckle, right hand, and I was forced to wear a plaster in my right hand, and I had to do stuff with left hand for a short while. And I noticed that some of the things I did, some of the arrangement or lyrics or pieces, they sounded somewhat fresh because, well, probably because I had to think my coordination differently. So it kind of rang me a bell later on with Alan Wake's sessions. I was about halfway through the workload of about some 30 plus orchestral cues, and in addition to game music, and I got a little stuck in the middle, nothing really helped, and it was horrible. The previous attempts had felt somewhat empty and shallow, and I felt awful. So I had also developed a horrible stinging pain in my right elbow, and I had to visit the doctors, and he told me that I might need a cortisone shot or two, and I had to keep my hand at rest for at least 2, maybe 3 weeks, but I had no time. I couldn't accept that, so I thought, heck it, I'm going to learn to be left-handed, totally, like using a coffee mug or using a mouse, writing my name, doing memo pad thing, whatever. And to my surprise, things started going better and better with the lefty, and locks and blocks get fading eventually, and I tackled the most difficult cues that game had. I mean, well-lit room and the clicker. And when I eventually switched back to being right-handed after a few months, the same thing happened again. And then later on, again, it became some kind of a game, mind game. So nowadays I do, if I'm stuck, I change my preferred hand, and I'm trying to affect the block before it even appears that way. Yeah, self-delusional, I know, but it works for me, and maybe you got something else. Different tools might be needed, I mean. But we all have that some secret magic weapon built into us, but we just need to know ourselves better in order to find it, which means that, okay, you need to know yourself. The key to those two aforementioned cues, well-lit room and the clicker, it was fragility. The knowledge everything is nothing but a blink away from total destruction. And in clicker, Alan and Alice were cuddling on the sofa, feeling rather cozy, and because that scene happened right in the middle of the most hellish events of that game, it sort of felt like a perfect retrospective getaway moment. So again, because of my lefty thing, fresh air came in, and I knew that I had written the original cue a little too full. And I first changed the meter of the song from 3/4 to 4/4, and then muted about 60% of all the tracks. But yeah, let's hear what came out after my left-hand thing. Oh, hello, what is going on? There. Yeah, so another case study concerning that. The cue was originally written for the end scene of the game, where Alice was diving back to surface from the depths of a cauldron lake. But a lucky misunderstanding in a phone call from my side placed the clicker, the previous song, in the New York scene. And another cue from elsewhere was put in the ending, thanks to my then rather cryptic naming antics, and people actually mixed the date with the scene number, so lucky accident. We tend to have that reminds me, we tend to have a common feature which can be reproduced with some random music piece from iTunes, and combining that clip with something from YouTube. And if you play the both at the same time, after a while, you start to notice that, hey, that hit the right beat, and that one, and that one, and that one. They feel clicking better and better the more you look at it. And that's audiovisual anchoring going on. We all do that. It's a pattern recognition. It comes from the prehistoric age when we had to find a tiger somewhere in the bushes, just recognizing something in the wild. A slightly identical accident happened with Alan Wake's The Well-Lit Room, as it was a placeholder without a true place. It was an orphan cue, so to speak. There were some events in the game that during the development cycle were forced to be removed due to budget and schedule cuts. And thus the then lonely piece ended up being left out until it was placed, accidentally again, behind a work copy of some cinematic where Alan Wake finds a way to free his wife. Well, sometimes heart-throbbing things work best with less music. After the accident drop in by some miraculous events, the final rising string motif started exactly when Wake's voiceover was running, and the cinematic team sent me an email to my great surprise. We got it, stop composing, we got it. The piece was originally written for the Anderson brothers that appear in the game. They were called Thor and Odin, according to, well, Norwegian ancestry, and the gods. So I created them their own theme with Norwegian stuff, like Hardanger violin and nyckelharpa and whatnot. Lots of percussion, and it resembled more like a scene from Vikings TV series than Alan Wake the game. Luckily, it happened that the Anderson's ancestry scene was diminished from the original plans, and the track was left in the drawer for a while. It was originally faster and louder and more stern and heavier, and then one day during my left-hand period, I muted all the percussion and replaced the nyckelharpa and Hardanger. And so reduce, that's a word you need to actually embrace. Reduce when it doesn't fit in. Then divide, that's another thing, and restrict. Sometimes you subconsciously put too many parts into a theme, which is when divide might work. You could divide a longer cue into 2 different songs. Don't put too much material in. Reduce works a bit differently in every case, and I'll get back to that in next slide. But in the well-lit room, restricting made wonders, and the result is this. This was originally known Wake's Goodbye. I've sometimes played the original one, I mean the Anderson Brothers version, but it's so shitty that I no longer torture people with it. So scrapping stuff, that happens to everybody, turning everything white and new again. Some more careful people than myself, they actually might call it grabbing a straw when drowning. Sometimes a cue just has to be killed in order to to save the rest, which is what I did with Quantum Break, when a theme I suggested for the game and the menu was just too much. It was just too melodic and harmonic and everything. I tried fighting against them, but after a summer holiday, I knew that they were right. So one of the key pieces, the only track of Quantum Break soundtrack that was oddly positive, it was shelved forever until, I finalized my album. And now, that track is nowadays a title theme of my album, but I guess we are not having time to play that. So instead I'm going to do this. So here goes another good idea. Reductions, divisions, and restrictions. I repeat. Restricting your choices or possibilities force you into what I call a deal mode. You deal with what you get and try to make the best you can. A good example, just give a cardboard box for a kid and a pencil or an ink pen, and the cardboard becomes a Death Star, it becomes Millennium Falcon, it becomes a tanker or tank, because we are here at the Wargaming event. Anything, and if you do the same with an adult, they probably just write winter stuff and place it on the shelf and forget it forever. But of course, it will take some time to get back your time of naive imagination, and it will take a lot of practice, but patience and perseverance. We might have grown off of using our imagination, which is why one would start playing with your moneymaker, the brain. Trick it, fool it, reduce, divide, restrict the hell out of it. Restrictions put your imagination into a top gear. Back in the, when people used only 4 tracks or 8 tracks or 16 tracks, most of the masterpieces of the music were done back then. And now the people have laptops and hundreds of tracks and loads of pirated plugins and whatnot. Is music really better than it used to be? I personally, I don't think so. I mean, you need to concentrate really hard to put down the idea of your perfect world in a sandbox, but the resulting idea is going to be much more crystallized than anything else, thanks to the restrictions. You need to restrict yourself in order to be more creative. Blocks make good building blocks. Embrace your blocks, or play with them. This is the last one. So, we are all different. We all act to stimuli differently. But in the back, our brains work in an identical way. We are all same in that sense. You just need to know yourself better, which I mentioned earlier. Train your brain, know your tools. That's really, really crucial. You have to know what's on your hard disk, what's in your plugin folder, which instruments you use. Let the fool out. Restrict, reduce, divide, replace, and please play. Play with the ideas and write down, imagine things. Use your imagination, use your brain. You owe it to yourself and your possible clients or whatnot. So, thank you.